The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floor of the Grand Plaza Hotel as Mei Lin wheeled her small suitcase through the revolving doors. Her simple blue dress and minimal jewelry didn't match the elaborate chandeliers and expensive art pieces decorating the lobby, but she held her head high, just as her father had taught her. At 24, Mei was determined to make it on her own. Despite being the daughter of business tycoon Robert Lin, she lived in a modest apartment and worked hard to complete her graduate studies without touching her trust fund. She'd saved up for months to treat herself to 3 nights at this luxury hotel, a small reward for acing her final exams. The check-in counter gleamed under warm lighting as Mei approached, pulling out her carefully saved receipts and booking confirmation. Behind the desk, a young man in a crisp suit adjusted his name tag that read Timothy Walsh, Assistant Manager. His eyes scanned her appearance quickly, and his welcoming smile dimmed just slightly. "Good evening, how may I help you?" His tone was professional but carried an edge of doubt. "Hi, I have a reservation for 3 nights," Mei said warmly, sliding her confirmation email across the counter. Under the name Lin. Timothy's fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical precision. Yes, I see the booking. I'll need your credit card and ID, please." Mei reached for her wallet, the same one she had since high school, a bit worn but still functional. She handed over her driver's license and credit card, watching as Timothy's eyebrows drew together while he examined them. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be an issue with this card," he announced, loud enough for nearby guests to turn their heads. "It's showing as declined." Mei's cheeks warmed. "That's strange. I made sure to transfer the funds yesterday. Could you try again?" Timothy swiped the card once more, his expression growing increasingly suspicious. "Still declined. Do you perhaps have another form of payment?" "Of course," Mei replied, trying to stay calm as she pulled out her backup card. "Sometimes my bank's fraud protection can be a bit sensitive." But before she could hand over the second card, Timothy's demeanor changed completely. He straightened up, looking down at her with what could only be described as contempt. "Ms. Lin, if that is your real name, we've had several incidents recently of people trying to use fraudulent cards. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Mei's heart dropped to her stomach. "There must be some mistake. I can show you my bank balance on my phone, or I can call my bank right now." "Security," Timothy called out, cutting her off mid-sentence. 2 men in dark suits appeared almost instantly. The lobby had gone quiet. Wealthy guests in designer clothes watched the scene unfold, some whispering behind manicured hands, others openly staring. An elderly couple shook their heads disapprovingly, at her, not at Timothy's behavior. "Please escort this person out," Timothy instructed, emphasizing the word person as if Mei was somehow less than human, "and make sure she understands that she's not welcome back." Mei's hands trembled as she gathered her ID and credit card, but she refused to cry. Years of watching her father handle difficult business situations had taught her something about maintaining dignity under pressure. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly, looking Timothy directly in the eyes, "one that you'll regret." The security guards moved to either side of her, not touching her but making it clear she needed to leave. Mei gripped her suitcase handle tightly and walked toward the exit, her head held high despite the humiliation burning in her chest. As the revolving doors spun her back out onto the street, the sky opened up. Fat raindrops splashed against the pavement, quickly soaking through her thin dress. Mei wheeled her suitcase under the nearest awning, finally allowing herself to take a shaky breath. She'd never used her father's name or connections to get ahead. It was a point of pride, something that made her feel like her own person. But as she stood there, watching the rain turn the city into a blur of neon reflections, she realized sometimes pride came at too high a price. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and scrolled to a number she rarely called. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Dad." Her voice cracked slightly. "I need your help." On the other end of the line, Robert Lin set down his coffee cup in his Singapore office, instantly alert at the sound of his daughter's voice. In 15 years, she had never asked him for help. Not once. "Tell me everything," he said softly, already reaching for his private jet pilot's number with his other hand. Inside the hotel, Timothy Walsh straightened his tie, satisfied with how he'd handled the situation. He had no way of knowing that his perfect record as assistant manager was about to come to a spectacular end, or that his next lesson in hospitality would come from one of the most powerful men in the business world. The rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of May's footprints from the hotel's marble steps, but the story of what happened at the Grand Plaza that evening was just beginning. The elegant lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel buzzed with quiet conversation and the gentle tinkling of crystal from the nearby bar. Timothy Walsh stood behind the front desk, his new assistant manager pin gleaming under the chandelier light. He'd worked too hard to get this position to let anyone take advantage of his hotel, especially not some girl in a cheap dress trying to scam a free room. "I've explained the situation," he said loudly, making sure nearby guests could hear him being professional. "Your car has been declined, and your behavior is suspicious. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Mei Lin stayed perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on the counter. When she spoke, her voice was calm but firm. "I understand there's an issue with the card, but I have another one. I can also show you my bank balance on my phone, or we could call my bank together." "I've heard enough excuses." Timothy cut her off, his voice rising slightly. A small crowd had started to gather, watching the drama unfold. He noticed Mrs. Henderson, one of their regular wealthy guests, watching with interest. Perfect. He could show everyone how well he protected the hotel's reputation. "Security," he called out, pressing a button under the desk. "Please escort this person out of the hotel." 2 security guards appeared almost instantly. The taller one, Officer Chen, approached cautiously. He'd been working at the hotel for 15 years, and something about this situation felt off. The young woman carried herself with too much natural grace to be a scammer. "Miss," Officer Chen said gently, "please come with us." Mia took a deep breath, just like her father had taught her during countless business dinners. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job. But Mr. Walsh is making a serious mistake. Could we perhaps call the general manager?" Timothy's face flushed red. "The general manager has better things to do than deal with attempted fraud. Remove her. Now." The crowd had grown larger. A young couple whispered behind their hands. A businessman lowered his newspaper to watch. A group of tourists pulled out their phones, ready to record if things got interesting. Officer Chen placed a careful hand near, but not on, May's elbow. "Miss, please, don't make this more difficult." May looked at Timothy one last time. "You know, my father always says that true character shows in how you treat people when you think they have no power." She picked up her small suitcase, its wheels squeaking slightly. "I wonder what that says about you, Mr. Walsh." Timothy snorted. "Save your fortune cookie wisdom. Security, make sure she understands she's not welcome back." The second guard, Officer Rodriguez, moved to May's other side. He'd seen plenty of people trying to scam the hotel, but something was different here. The girl wasn't arguing or making a scene. She wasn't dropping names or threatening to shoo. She just looked disappointed. As they walked toward the door, the whispers grew louder. An elderly man in an expensive suit shook his head, though it wasn't clear at whom. Mrs. Henderson pursed her lips, her diamond rings flashing as she typed something on her phone. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, letting in the sound of rain and city traffic. Officer Chen hesitated. "Miss, would you like us to call you a taxi?" Before Mai could answer, Timothy's voice rang out from the desk. "That won't be necessary. I'm sure she can find another hotel to scam." Several guests looked uncomfortable now. A mother pulled her children closer, whispering something about being kind to people. A businessman in a sharp suit frowned, closing his laptop with a snap. Mai stepped out into the rain, her thin dress offering little protection. She turned back one last time, meeting Timothy's triumphant gaze with quiet dignity. "I hope you remember this moment, Mr. Walsh." "I certainly will." The doors closed behind her with a final sounding click. Officer Chen and Rodriguez exchanged worried glances. In their years of security work, they'd learned that the truly wealthy rarely announce themselves. They just had a certain way about them, exactly like the young woman they'd just escorted out. Back at the desk, Timothy straightened his tie, pleased with himself. A few guests approached the desk, but not to congratulate him as he'd expected. Instead, they asked to speak to his supervisor about what they just witnessed. "I handled a security situation," he said confidently. "Nothing to worry about." Mrs. Henderson walked past, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. "Young man," she said, her voice carrying years of social authority, "I've stayed at this hotel for 20 years. Never have I seen such a shameful display of poor judgment." Timothy's smile faltered slightly. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing away Mi's footprints from the sidewalk. In the growing darkness, no one noticed the logo on the side of her suitcase, a small, discreet symbol of one of Asia's largest tech companies. Officer Chen returned to his post, shaking his head. In 15 years at the Grand Plaza, he'd learned one thing: in the hotel business, you never really knew who someone was until it was too late. And something told him that Timothy Walsh was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Inside the hotel, life continued as normal. Guests checked in and out. Bellhops carried expensive luggage. The bar filled with the after-work crowd. But there was a tension in the air, a feeling that something significant had just happened, even if most people didn't realize it yet. Timothy filed his incident report, carefully wording it to make himself look professional and decisive. He had no way of knowing that this report would soon be read by some of the most powerful people in the hotel industry, or that his perfect record as assistant manager was about to come to a spectacular end. The rain drummed steadily against the awning above Mi's head as she stared at her phone screen, her finger hovering over her father's contact photo. In the picture, Robert Lin stood beside his private jet, looking every bit the powerful businessman he was, but May remembered how his eyes had crinkled with laughter just seconds after that photo was taken. She hadn't called him for help since she was 9 years old and had fallen off her bike. Even then, she tried to handle it herself until he found her attempting to bandage her own knee. Now, 15 years later, standing outside a hotel that had just humiliated her, she felt like that little girl again. Her dress was soaked, her hair dripping, and her carefully applied makeup starting to run. A couple hurried past her into the hotel, giving her a wide berth as if her bad luck might be contagious. Through the rotating glass doors, she could still see Timothy Walsh at his desk, already having forgotten about the woman he'd just thrown out into the rain. Taking a deep breath, May pressed the call button. 1 ring. She could still hang up. 2 rings. Maybe this was a mistake. 3 rings. Just as she was about to end the call, May, her father's voice carried across 12 time zones, clear and concerned. "Is everything okay?" In his Singapore office, Robert Lin was in the middle of a crucial meeting about a potential merger. But something in his daughter's name on his phone screen had made him excuse himself immediately. Minnie never called during business hours. She never called for help at all. "Dad?" Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. "I need your help." 12 floors above his bustling Singapore office, Robert set down his coffee cup so hard that some of the liquid sloshed onto his desk calendar. His daughter's voice, usually so strong and independent, sounded small and hurt, and it made something fierce and protective stir in his chest. "Tell me everything," he said softly, already pressing the intercom button to summon his assistant. As May recounted what had happened, her voice grew steadier. She told him about the declined card, about Timothy Walsh's accusations, about being escorted out like a criminal. With each word, she could hear her father's breathing getting more controlled, a sign she recognized from childhood as him containing his anger. "I know I should have handled it better," she finished, wiping rain from her face. I didn't know what else to do." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Mai could picture her father pinching the bridge of his nose, as he always did when thinking deeply. "Mi," he said finally, his voice gentle. "Do you remember what I told you when you decided to live on your own?" "That independence is admirable, but isolation is foolish," she quoted, managing a small smile despite everything. "Exactly. Family isn't a crutch, sweetheart. It's a foundation." The sound of rapid typing came through the phone. "I'm booking a flight now. I'll be there in 16 hours. "Dad, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." More typing. "Besides, I think it's time I gave Mr. Walsh and the Grand Plaza Hotel a lesson in hospitality." Mi heard familiar voices in the background, her father's team springing into action. She could picture the organized chaos that would be erupting in his office right now, his assistant rebooking meetings, his pilot being notified, his legal team being assembled. "I've already sent a car for you," he continued. "It should be there in 10 minutes. The driver will take you to the Four Seasons. They're expecting you. Get some rest, have some hot tea, and try not to worry about anything else." "Thank you, Dad," May said softly, feeling tears well up again. But this time, they weren't from humiliation. "Don't thank me yet," Robert replied, and now there was a hint of steel in his voice. "I'm about to show that hotel manager exactly why the Lin family has been successful in business for 3 generations. It's not our money that makes us powerful, it's how we treat people." Through the phone, May heard her father's assistant gasp, followed by urgent whispering. "Sir, the Grand Plaza's parent company, we own 30% of their shares through subsidiary investments." Robert Lin's laugh was quiet but carried a weight that May recognized. It was the same laugh he'd had when her high school principal had tried to blame her for another student's cheating. That principal had ended up apologizing publicly within a week. "Perfect," he said. "May, sweetheart, I need to make some calls. The car will be there soon. Look for a black Mercedes with a gold dragon charm on the mirror. Try to get some sleep tonight. Tomorrow is going to be very interesting." After they hung up, May leaned against the cold stone wall of the building, feeling the tension start to leave her shoulders. Through the glass doors, she could see Timothy Walsh still at his desk, probably congratulating himself on protecting the hotel from what he assumed was a scammer. A small, satisfied smile crossed her face as she thought about tomorrow. Her father had taught her many lessons about business over the years, but the most important one was this: true power isn't in making people fear you, it's in making them regret ever giving you a reason to show them who you really are. As if on cue, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb, a small golden dragon swaying from its mirror. The driver stepped out with an umbrella, hurrying to shield her from the rain. "Ms. Lin," he said respectfully, opening the car door. "Your father sends his regards." May took one last look at the Grand Plaza Hotel before sliding into the warm, dry interior of the car. Tomorrow would indeed be very interesting. But for now, she was simply grateful for something she'd almost forgotten. Sometimes, it's okay to let your family catch you when you fall. The morning sun had barely touched the Grand Plaza Hotel's windows when the first phone call came. Timothy Walsh was adjusting his tie in his office's small mirror, still feeling pleased about how he'd handled the potential scammer the night before when his desk phone rang. "Mr. Walsh? This is Jennifer from corporate office." The voice on the other end sounded tense. "Could you please explain what happened with a guest named May Lin last night?" Timothy straightened his shoulders. "Of course. I prevented a potential fraud attempt." The individual presented a declined credit card and displayed suspicious behavior. "I followed standard protocol." "Did you run a secondary verification?" Jennifer cut in. Well, no, but did you offer to contact her bank?" She seemed unreliable and given recent incidents. "Mr. Walsh," Jennifer's voice had gone from tense to sharp. "Do you have any idea who May Lin is?" Before he could answer, his other line started blinking. Then his email notification pinged. Then his cell phone buzzed. Within minutes, his quiet morning turned into chaos. In the hotel's main office, General Manager Patricia Chen was having an even worse start to her day. Her computer screen showed a cascade of urgent emails, each one making her face grow paler. "Get me Walsh," she barked into her phone. "Now." Timothy practically ran to her office, still clutching his morning coffee. Through the glass walls, he could see other managers huddled around their computers, throwing glances his way. "Sit down," Patricia ordered as soon as he entered. She turned her monitor around to face him. "Do you recognize this man?" On the screen was a photo of Robert Lin, one of Asia's most prominent business figures, standing in front of his tech empire's headquarters. Timothy nodded slowly, confusion evident on his face. "Good. Now, let me show you something else." She clicked to another tab, showing a family photo. There, standing next to Robert Lin, was the young woman Timothy had thrown out of the hotel the night before. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, spilling across his freshly pressed pants. He barely noticed. That's May Lin, daughter of Robert Lin, whose company owns 1/3 of our parent corporation through various investments." Patricia's voice was deadly quiet. The same Mei Lin you accused of fraud and had security escort out into the rain last night. Timothy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But she didn't say anything about. Of course she didn't. Patricia slammed her hand on the desk. Unlike some people, Ms. Lin doesn't feel the need to throw around her family name to get respect. Down in the lobby, the morning shift was buzzing with whispers. Word had spread fast about what happened the night before, and every employee who had witnessed the incident was now sharing their version of events. I tried to tell him, Lisa from the front desk whispered to her colleague. The way she handled herself, you could tell she came from money. Real money doesn't need to show off. Their conversation was interrupted by the hotel's director of operations rushing through the lobby, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Lin, I completely understand. We are taking this very seriously. Back in Patricia's office, Timothy sat slumped in his chair as she read through the growing list of emails. Corporate is in panic mode. Robert Lin's private jet just left Singapore. His legal team has already requested all security footage from last night. The head of our Asian operations personally called to tell me that if this situation isn't handled properly, we could lose contracts across 6 countries. She looked up at Timothy, who had gone from pale to slightly green. But do you want to know the worst part? He nodded weakly. The card decline? It was our system's error. The payment went through 4 minutes after you had security remove her, which means you didn't even wait to verify what was happening. You just assumed. Timothy's chest felt tight. What's going to happen? Before Patricia could answer, her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the message and let out a long breath. Robert Lin will be here in approximately 12 hours. He's requested a meeting with all senior management. She paused, fixing Timothy with a stern look. And you? Around the hotel, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Staff members who had witnessed Mei's humiliation were sharing guilty looks. The security guards who had escorted her out were being questioned by HR. The elderly couple who had shaken their heads disapprovingly at her were now at the front desk, having recognized her from a magazine cover, asking if there was any way to apologize. At his desk, Timothy opened his laptop and typed Robert Lin Business Success into the search bar. Article after article popped up, many mentioning how the businessman was known for his emphasis on treating people with respect regardless of their apparent status. One quote in particular made Timothy's stomach turn. My father taught me that true character is revealed in how you treat those who can't do anything for you. I've built my company on that principle, and I've taught my daughter the same. The young manager closed his laptop and loosened his tie, which suddenly felt too tight. Outside his window, storm clouds were gathering again, much like they had the night before when Mei Lin stood in the rain. But Timothy had a feeling that the storm coming his way would make last night's rain look like a light drizzle. In 12 hours, he would learn exactly why the Lin family had maintained their success for 3 generations, and why underestimating people based on appearances was the kind of mistake you only make once in your career. The Grand Plaza Hotel's lobby had never been so quiet. At exactly 9 a.m., every manager and supervisor stood in a tense line, their faces a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, highlighting the spot where just yesterday a young woman had been humiliated in front of dozens of guests. Patricia Chen, the general manager, checked her watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. Her normally perfect hair showed signs of stress. She'd been at the hotel since 4 a.m., personally inspecting every corner of the property. Behind her, Timothy Walsh shifted uncomfortably in his new suit, bought hastily this morning in an attempt to look more professional. Stop fidgeting, Patricia whispered without turning around. And remember, don't speak unless directly asked a question. The front doors opened and a distinguished-looking man in his early 60s stepped through. Robert Lin moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. His simple charcoal suit probably cost more than Timothy's annual salary, but he wore it like it was an afterthought. Behind him walked 4 people carrying leather briefcases, his legal team. Officer Chen, standing at his usual post, straightened automatically. This was what real power looked like, not someone shouting about their importance, but someone whose presence made a room change just by entering it. Patricia stepped forward, hand extended. Mr. Lin, welcome to the Grand Plaza. I'm Patricia Chen, the general manager. Robert shook her hand firmly but didn't smile. Ms. Chen, I believe we have some matters to discuss. His voice was quiet but carried across the silent lobby. I understand the young assistant manager who handled my daughter's situation is here. Timothy's legs felt like jelly as he stepped forward. Ah, yes, sir, I'm Timothy Walsh. Robert studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Interesting. You look older in person than you did on the security footage. One of the lawyers opened his briefcase and pulled out a tablet, pressing play on a video. The lobby speakers, usually reserved for soft background music, now played the scene from yesterday. Timothy's voice rang out, clear and condescending, as he accused May of fraud. Hotel guests passing through slowed to watch, some recognizing Robert Lin from business magazines and news reports. A few pulled out their phones, but a quick glance from one of his lawyers made them reconsider. When the video finished, Robert spoke again, his voice still eerily calm. Mr. Walsh, do you know what the difference is between power and authority? Timothy swallowed hard. I'm not sure, sir. Authority is what you had yesterday, a title, a position, the ability to make decisions. Power. Robert straightened his cufflinks, a gift from May last Father's Day. Power is what you'll see today. He turned to Patricia. Ms. Chen, I spent the last 16 hours reviewing your hotel's policies, employee training programs, and customer service protocols. I found them lacking. Patricia nodded, her face professional but worried. We're prepared to make whatever changes you recommend, Mr. Lin. Good, because starting today, every single employee in every hotel in your chain will undergo mandatory bias training. My company's HR team has already prepared the materials. He gestured to one of his lawyers, who handed Patricia a thick folder. The cost will be significant, but I believe treating people with dignity is worth the investment. Timothy felt a drop of sweat roll down his back. Mr. Lin, I want to apologize. No. Robert's voice cut through the air like a knife. You don't want to apologize. You want to keep your job. There's a difference. He turned back to Patricia. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because someone in a position of authority decided that appearances determine worth. That kind of thinking ends today. The hotel staff stood in stunned silence as Robert continued. My daughter called me yesterday for the first time in 15 years asking for help. Do you know what she said this morning when I saw her? He looked directly at Timothy. She asked me not to have you fired. Timothy's eyes widened in surprise. She said everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. That's the kind of person you've humiliated yesterday, Mr. Walsh. That's the kind of person you threw out into the rain. One of the lawyers stepped forward with another document. The board has approved a complete overhaul of customer service protocols. Every complaint will now receive a full investigation before any action is taken. Every declined card will be verified through multiple channels. Every guest will be treated with respect, regardless of how they're dressed or what they look like. Robert straightened his tie. Ms. Chen, I'll need your office for the next few hours. My team will walk you through the changes. Mr. Walsh, he paused, looking at the young manager, you'll be transferred to our customer service training center in Chicago. 6 months of learning what real hospitality means. Consider it a second chance, one you didn't give my daughter. As Robert walked toward the elevator, the same elderly couple who had witnessed May's removal approached hesitantly. Mr. Lin, we were here yesterday. We'd like to apologize for not speaking up. Robert stopped, his expression softening slightly. The only person who needs to apologize is the one who made the wrong choice. But thank you for your conscience. He looked around the lobby one last time. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones we get for free. The elevator doors closed behind him, leaving the lobby in thoughtful silence. Timothy stood rooted to his spot, his perfect record as assistant manager in shambles, but something new taking root in his mind, understanding. Officer Chen, still at his post, smiled slightly. In 15 years at the hotel, he'd seen countless displays of wealth and status. But true power, he realized, wasn't in making people fear you. It was in having every reason to destroy someone and choosing to teach them instead. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Grand Plaza Hotel's conference room as Robert Lin stood at the window, watching the city bustle below. Behind him, a team of lawyers and hotel executives sat around a massive mahogany table, finalizing the details of what would become the hotel chain's most comprehensive policy overhaul in its 50-year history. "Mr. Lin," Patricia Chen spoke up, her voice steady despite her obvious exhaustion. They'd been in meetings for 6 hours straight. "We've prepared the announcement about Mr. Walsh's transfer to the training center. Would you like to review it?" Robert turned from the window, his expression thoughtful. "Actually, I've been thinking about that. Where is Mr. Walsh now?" "In his office, sir. Preparing to hand over his duties." "Bring him here, please." A few minutes later, Timothy Walsh entered the conference room, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 24 hours. His new suit was slightly wrinkled, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much. "Sit down, Mr. Walsh," Robert gestured to an empty chair. "I want to tell you a story." The room fell silent as Robert settled into his chair. 25 years ago, I made my first business trip to New York. I was younger than you, wearing a suit that cost every penny I had, trying to convince American investors to trust their money to a young businessman from Asia. He paused, studying Timothy's face. "I walked into a prestigious investment firm, and do you know what happened? The receptionist took one look at me and assumed I was a delivery person. She told me the service entrance was around back." Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Timothy stared at his hands, unable to meet Robert's eyes. "I could have gotten angry. I could have demanded she be fired. Instead, I smiled, explained who I was, and proceeded to secure a deal that helped build my company's foundation." Robert leaned forward. "Do you know why I'm telling you this?" Timothy looked up finally. Because I did the same thing to your daughter." "No." Robert's voice was firm but not unkind. "I'm telling you this because that receptionist is now my company's chief operating officer in North America." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Timothy's eyes widened. She learned from that moment. She turned her mistake into a mission to never judge people by their appearance. She's helped build our company's culture of respect and dignity. Robert stood up, walking around the table. "The question is, Mr. Walsh, what will you learn from your mistake?" Timothy straightened in his chair. I want to learn everything I can, sir. Not just about hotel management, but about treating people right. About seeing them for who they are, not what they look like." "Good answer." Robert nodded to Patricia, who pulled out a different document. "That's why I'm modifying your transfer. Instead of 6 months in Chicago, you'll spend 2 months at each of our major properties in Asia. Learn how different cultures show respect. Understand what true hospitality means across the world." Timothy's mouth fell open. "Sir, I don't deserve." "This isn't about what you deserve," Robert cut in. "It's about what you can become. My daughter sees potential in you, Mr. Walsh. Don't prove her wrong." Across the table, one of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Sir, we've finished drafting the new customer service protocols. Would you like to review them?" Robert took the offered tablet, scanning through the document. "Add a section about second chances," he said quietly. "Make it clear that how we handle our mistakes defines us more than the mistakes themselves." The afternoon light had shifted to early evening when they finally finished. As the executives filed out, Patricia stayed behind with Robert and Timothy. "The new training programs will begin next week," she said, organizing her papers. "Every employee, from housekeeping to management, will participate. We're calling it the Dignity Initiative." Robert nodded approvingly. "And the scholarship program?" "Yes, sir, 10 full scholarships each year for hospitality students from underprivileged backgrounds." The board approved it unanimously. Timothy listened in amazement. What had started as his terrible mistake was transforming into something remarkable, a complete revolution in how the hotel chain approached customer service and employee training. "Mr. Walsh," Robert turned to him one last time. "Your flight to Tokyo leaves in 3 days. Before you go, I suggest you do one thing." "What's that, sir?" "Talk to Officer Chen downstairs. He tried to warn you about my daughter, didn't he? Learn from his experience. Sometimes the quietest voices have the most to teach us." As Timothy left the conference room, he felt different. The shame of his actions was still there, but alongside it was something new: hope and a determination to prove himself worthy of this unexpected second chance. Robert watched him go, then checked his phone. There was a message from May. "Dad, dinner tonight?" "I found a nice small restaurant, nothing fancy, just good food and better company." He smiled, typing back a quick yes. His daughter had inherited more than just his business sense. She had his heart for turning negative situations into positive change. Outside the hotel, the same rain clouds from 2 nights ago were gathering again. But this time, they didn't feel threatening. They felt like nature's way of washing away the old and making room for something new. Patricia gathered her things, pausing at the door. "Mr. Lin, thank you. Not just for the changes, but for showing us what true leadership looks like." Robert straightened his tie, thinking of his daughter's smile when he told her about the scholarship program. "The best leaders don't just fix problems, Ms. Chen. They transform them into opportunities for everyone to grow." As the last light faded from the conference room windows, the Grand Plaza Hotel felt different. It wasn't just a luxury hotel anymore. It was becoming a place where dignity and respect weren't just words in a policy manual, but principles lived out every day, by every person, for every guest. 3 months had passed since that rainy night at the Grand Plaza Hotel. The autumn air was crisp as Mei Lin walked through the revolving doors, this time to host a charity gala for educational scholarships. The lobby looked the same: elegant chandeliers, marble floors, sophisticated guests, but something felt different. Officer Chen smiled warmly from his usual post. "Welcome back, Ms. Lin. The ballroom is ready for your event." Mei returned his smile, remembering how he'd tried to show kindness even on that difficult night. "Thank you. And please, just Mei is fine." The hotel staff moved with a new kind of awareness, treating every guest with the same respectful attention, regardless of their appearance. A young backpacker in worn jeans was being helped with the same courtesy as a businessman in an expensive suit. At the front desk, a new sign quietly announced the hotel's commitment to dignified service for all. Patricia Chen emerged from her office, looking relaxed and confident. "Mei, everything's prepared for the gala. We're expecting 300 guests, and the scholarship announcement has generated quite a buzz." The ballroom had been transformed into an elegant space for the evening's event. Tables draped in cream-colored linens held place cards for business leaders, educators, and students who would benefit from the new scholarship program. But what caught Mei's eye was the small display near the entrance, a photo wall showing diverse hotel staff in training sessions, learning about cultural sensitivity and respectful service. "Your father's changes have transformed not just our hotel, but the entire chain," Patricia said, following Mei's gaze. "The Dignity Initiative is being studied by hospitality schools now." Mei nodded, adjusting a flower arrangement. "And how are the new training programs going?" "Incredibly well. We've had staff from different properties sharing their experiences." Patricia paused as her phone buzzed. "Speaking of which," she handed Mei her phone, showing an email with photos attached. In them, Timothy Walsh stood with hotel staff in Tokyo, his face earnest as he learned about Japanese customs of respect and hospitality. Another photo showed him studying Mandarin with colleagues in Beijing. "He writes to us every week," Patricia explained. "The things he's learning, the ways he's changed. Your father's decision to send him abroad instead of firing him, it was brilliant." The ballroom slowly filled with guests as evening approached. Mei stood near the entrance, greeting people and directing them to their tables. A familiar elderly couple approached, the same ones who had witnessed her removal from the hotel 3 months ago. "Ms. Lin," the woman said warmly, "we're so pleased to be here. My husband and I have decided to match the scholarship fund for the next 5 years." Before Mei could respond, a quiet buzz went through the crowd. Robert Lin had arrived, looking distinguished as always but with a gentle smile that few business reporters ever got to see. He made his way to his daughter, squeezing her hand softly. "Ready for your speech?" he asked. Mei took a deep breath, straightening her simple but elegant blue dress, the same color as the one she'd worn that rainy night. "Ready." The room fell silent as she approached the podium. Hundreds of faces looked up at her, hotel staff, business leaders, students full of hope. Even the kitchen staff had paused their work to listen. 3 months ago, I stood in this hotel's lobby and learned a valuable lesson about power," she began. "Not about having it, but about how we use it. Today, we're not here to dwell on past mistakes. We're here to celebrate how those mistakes can transform into opportunities. She gestured to the scholarship display. Starting next semester, 50 students who might never have had the chance will begin their journey in hospitality management. They'll learn not just about running hotels, but about understanding people, about seeing beyond surfaces, about turning difficult moments into chances for growth. Robert watched his daughter with quiet pride. She'd taken what could have been a humiliating experience and turned it into something that would help others for years to come. My father taught me that true power isn't in making people fear you, Mai continued. It's in lifting others up. It's in turning wrongs into rights. It's in seeing the potential in everyone, even those who might have judged you unfairly. She paused, looking around the room. The scholarships we're announcing tonight aren't just about education. They're about building a world where dignity isn't earned, it's given freely, where respect isn't based on appearance or status, but on our shared humanity. As applause filled the room, Officer Chen discreetly wiped his eyes. He'd seen countless powerful people come through these doors, but never had he witnessed power used so wisely, so kindly. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Mai received another photo from Timothy. He was bowing respectfully to an elderly guest at the Tokyo Hotel, his face showing genuine understanding. The caption read, "Learning something new every day. Thank you for believing in second chances." Mai showed the photo to her father as they sat having a quiet cup of tea after the event. The same lobby that had once witnessed her humiliation now felt like a place of transformation. "You know," Robert said thoughtfully, "when you called me that night, I was ready to come here and show everyone what real power looks like." He smiled at his daughter. "But you showed them something better, what real leadership looks like." Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, but this time it felt different. It wasn't a rain of humiliation or regret, but one of renewal. The Grand Plaza Hotel stood tall in the city skyline, its lights warm and welcoming to all who entered its doors. Inside, the new training manual's first page held a simple message: every guest has a story, every person has worth. Our job is not to judge, but to serve with dignity. Below it, in smaller letters, inspired by a rainy night that changed everything. The story of what happened at the Grand Plaza Hotel didn't end with that difficult night. Instead, it began there, a story of transformation, of learning, of turning wrongs into rights. And somewhere in Tokyo, a young hotel manager was learning that the biggest rooms in any hotel weren't the presidential suites, but the space in our hearts for growth, change, and understanding.